This conference will now be recorded.
Fine. So over here, as- so over here, what we started off was we started appreciating. So the last part was we looked into the overall flow of the IFRS 9 standards, right? So how did the thing begin? We looked into the final accounts of the bank. We talked about the IFRS 9 versus the incurred loss approach. We talked about the Basel treatments versus the IFRS 9 treatment of assets. We talked about the key features of IFRS 9 assets, SPPI criteria, asset classification, key concepts, delinquency buckets, difference between delinquency and impairment, etc. Right? Then what we tried doing was we tried detailed blue ups of the structure of the banking books. From there, what we did was we started talking about the retail and the commercial assets, right? Cash. So we talked about the cash flow character classification of the assets, personal loan of the assets, So over here, the next thing that we talked about was the structure of the banking books, so the retail, commercial. We introduced the concept of the staging criteria, the significant increase in credit risk, and so on. Right, and from there, what we tried doing was we tried appreciating the standards in detail with reference to the financial statements. Over there, we talked about the asset classification. So we talked about asset and amortized cost. We talked about FVOCIs and fair values in profit and loss, right? And what we also did was we looked into the financial statement for Qatar Insurance Corporation, where the objective was to assess the components relevant for IFRS 9 for this particular organization, right? So now the next question that we try to address over here is, so the most important question that we try to address over here is that how do we develop an IFRS 9 model, right? So we talked about the asset classifications, right? So what are the broad types of IFRS 9 models, modeling approaches, right? So that is what we are going to look into from the IFRS 9 perspective, right? So over here, when we talk about, so in today's discussion, we will be focusing mostly on the IFRS 9 modeling approaches. Next part is IFRS 9 modeling approach. So the question that comes out is that what are the two most, or what are the two broad modeling approaches that IFRS 9 follows? The first is the generalized approach. is the generalized approach. The second is the simplified approach. So the first question that comes out over here is that if I am to develop an IFRS 9 model, how is it that or when is it that I should be applying each of these respective measures? So when is it that we should be applying this generalized and this simplified approach, right? So what exactly will be the usages of this generalized and simplified approach over here? The first question that comes out is that when do I use this generalized approach? The answer is that when there is a significant financing component attached with it, is a significant okay. So the generalized approach is applicable if the asset has a significant financing component. Now, what do I mean by a significant financing component? Now, what I simply mean is that if there is an interest rate attached with this particular generalized approach or with an asset, right, then the generalized approach is something that would be used. So, let's say for personal loans or for any kind of term loans or say any kind of bonds which brings with it kind of assets or so any of these assets or any of these things which has a significant financing component attached to it. Now what I mean by this significant financing component is that this should be breakable, or the entire amount can be broken up into principal plus interest, right? So if you have, let's say, an investment, let's say a bond, or you have a loan, or you have a term loan, which has a principal component along with an interest component to it, then you say that yes, this is something which is which should go under the financing component, which should face the financing. So which has a financing component to it, and hence a generalized approach would be used because when you are doing this, right? So the uh, so this decoupling between the principal and the interest rate is important for the staging analysis, right? So when you are doing the staging exercise would hold only, or the computation of the fund or the amount would hold across the stages if there is a financing component, that is you have a principal plus interest breakup of the receivables that is outstanding. So this is applicable for product like, so in any products like term loans, right? Term loans, bonds, etc. term loans, bonds, and other investments which give you a contractual cash flow along with a principal and an interest. So the contractual cash flow which can be broken down into principal plus interests, right? So we'll see in detail, in more details, what the IFRS standards has to say about these assets, right? Now coming to the next part. So if an asset does not have a significant financing component, then what we will use is the simplified approach, right? So the question that comes out is, under what kind of situation would I be using simplified approach? I would be using simplified approach for trade receivables. So the question that comes out over here is that what is this trade receivables? How does a trade receivable series look like? So we have trade receivables, we have other assets like lease receivables, these receivables. Then there are contractual receivables, etc. So now the question that comes out over here is that how is this trade receivables different from this lease receivables? Or, I mean, how is it that trade receivables, lease receivables, etc., they are different from the term loans, bonds, etc.? Because both of these assets have a contractual cash flow. So how do you solve the problem? So over here, these receivables are contractual in nature, right? But they do not have an interest component. So suppose you sell the good to a borrower, right? Or you sell the good to a firm. Now this firm will not pay you directly at a go. And what he'll do is he'll pay you over a monthly, or he would make his payments 3 months with a bill of exchange of 3 months, right? So, or you know that he will pay you on a monthly basis. Month on month, he'll keep on paying that money back to you. But it's that entire receivable which is divided into the number of months that he'll take to pay back to you, but it does not contain any interest. So it's a contractual payment, but the receivables do not have any interest, right? So in the contractual payment, but no interest. But no interest. So this is the basic difference between the generalized and the simplified approach. I mean, the scope of generalized and simplified approach, and the next thing that comes out over here is the following. That when I'm talking about the generalized and the simplified approach, what is the key difference between these two measures? The first thing is that this approach comes in with a staging approach. So there is an element of staging. So the asset basis its performance, or basis the performance of the borrower, is classified into stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. But over here, you do not really have staging. So no staging prescribed. So this is one of the most important characteristics of this particular framework. So basically what we have is we don't have a staging exercise. So these are your two broad frameworks for IFRS 9 modeling. The first is you have your generalized approach. It is applicable for assets with significant financing component. The next is so it is available for assets like term loans, bonds, etc. On the other hand, you have simplified assets, trade receivables, lease receivables, contractual payments. So basically, this is applicable for trade receivables, lease receivables, which have contractual payment, but they do not have any interest, right? So no staging is proper. So no staging exercise is generally required over here. So these are the two broad approaches that we talk about under IFRS 9, right? So from here, the next question that comes out is that how would a generalized approach look like? How would an asset for a generalized approach look like? How would an asset for a simplified approach look like? So this is the next question that we try to answer. So over here, so let's just open. Okay. So let's do a definition check. Trade receivables. So if you have a look into this, so this is a particular PwC document. If you have a look into this, it says it shows you the similarity and the differences between the three approaches, right? Or broadly, the two approaches, generalized approach and the simplified approach. Because these are the two things which we mostly use, right? So over here, if you see, if you look into the basic difference in terms, and over here on this column side, it shows the difference as the matrices in terms of which the differences are identified. So the first is the timing of the initial recognition, right? So the same period, so basically it says that in the generalized approach, what you do is you identify the initial recognition at same period as an asset is recognized, right? Uh, the next is for simplified approach, this time period is same as generalized approach. Now the next question is measurement basis of loss allowance. So over here it's like 12-month ECLs unless a significant increase in credit risk occurs. And if a credit risk occurs, then you compute the lifetime ECL. But over here for the simplified approach, we compare the lifetime ECLs only, right? So this is a major difference that we can see between the two, right? So given that there is a staging exercise done, so you have two different approaches of PDA, of estimating the PD or estimating the ECLs. One is your next 12 months ECL. lifetime ECL, right? So over here we have two things, right? So the first thing is we have the next 12 months ECL, and then it's a lifetime ECL. Whereas over here we are concerned only with the lifetime ECL. Now the question that comes out over here is, with 12 months ECL, it's fine. We totally understand how it is done. Now the question that comes out over here is that when we are talking about lifetime ECLs, how is it computed or how is it calculated? So the statistical model should do the same. Same would be a bit different, right? So let's have a very quick look over here. Okay, so this is one of the major difference between the generalized and the simplified approach, right? Now, just moving on, so we have talked about the amortized cost and all these parts. Okay, let's show you. Right. This is, I was looking for the ISD website. I need to give you that link. So this is a website, where you will get every details related to IFRS 9, right? So which sections of IFRS 9 does refers to what? Let's say you want to talk about trade receivables. So how is it that trade receivables are exactly defined in IFRS 9, the legality? So this is the website that you need to refer to. So this website has been maintained by Deloitte, right? And it it is kind of a dictionary. It's kind of a guideline to the international accounting standards. So you may have a very quick look into this, and just keep this link handy because So when working with IFRS 9, this becomes really very easy to refer. Right. So this is one of the websites, and it contains the very detailed description of the IFRS 9 history and all its other press releases and everything. So it's put in a very crisp manner, right? Okay. So over here, before we move on, right? So talking about IFRS 9 and talking about ECL, the first question that we need to define over here is, so both these measures they need to define a very critical concept, which will be the target variable going forward, is impairment. So impairment. So the question that comes out is over here that when I'm talking about IFRS 9, right? So target variable in IFRS 9 is to estimate the impairment, right? Now the next part is, so basically with the IFRS 9 modeling approach is there. So with this impairment, so with this, so the next thing that we want to do over here is that we need to estimate the impairments. So if I need to, so my target is to estimate the impairment. The question that comes out is that what exactly is this impairment? So what is impairment? How would you define impairment? Yes. How would you define impairment? Okay. So the question of impairment comes from. So impairment is, very simply speaking, the money which is not received. Right? So I have a money, I have a set of money, or I have a cash which I have not received, or this cash outstanding or a cash receivable at my end which I have not received. So it's very simply money not received. Not received. Now, if I talk about this money not received, right? The question is, why is it not received? Because there was a discrepancy between the actual cash flow and the expected cash flow. So there was a difference between the observed cash flow and the expected cash flow minus the expected cash flow. So observed cash flow minus the expected cash flow. So now when I'm doing this, right? So when I'm trying to do this, so what's the question? So what's the problem over here? So over here, there is certain cash flow which I expect. Which is the cash flow? Or this is the decided, this part is the cash flow decided as per the contract. So this is your contractual cash flow or the cash flow as per the contract. So this is your contractual cash flow. And this is obviously the actual cash flow which comes in. And this is the actual cash flow. Now, when if there's a difference between each of these two cash flows, then what I'll say is that yes, there is a impairment because ideally what would happen is the expected cash flow would be greater than the observed cash flow. So it's the expected cash flow minus the observed or the actual cash flows is your impairment. So the next question that comes out is, if I have to compute the expect the observed cash flows, or if I need to frame so there is a cash flow which is coming in, right? Now based on that cash flow, what I need to find out is what would be the possible cash flow in the future. So it is this part, it is this part where I believe we would require to be more predictive. So basis this observed cash flow, what I am trying to do is I'm trying to say, fine, this is an observed series of cash flows, and I want to predict what would the cash flow be in the future. And I have an expected cash flow, right? So I have a contractual cash flow corresponding to it, which was decided as per the contract. So now the difference between these two will be my impairment, right? And to predict this cash flow, and so if you can actually predict the what is the cash flow going to look like over the next 12 months, over the lifetime, then you can make it out what is the impairment going to look over the next 12 months, over the lifetime, right? So this is where the impairment definition comes in. The impairment definition, impairment is nothing but is the difference between the expected cash flow and the observed cash flow. Right? Anshul, are you clear on this?
Yes, yes, Tanmay.
Perfect. Now, now my question is, now see the question that comes out over here is that how do I identify my cash flow, right? So what are the, so how is it that this cash flow is identified? So obviously the cash flow is identified either through an amortization schedule, right? So basically you have a cash flow and you discount it at a given rate. So what is discounting look like, or what does discounting actually look like? So what is discounting all about? Okay, fine. So let's take up a very simple example. Let's say I have a certain principal P equals to P0 at a point of time. At time T equals to 0, right? Now for me the principal is the amount, let's say, that I have given to the borrower. So what I want to know is that after 1 year, so after 1 year at T plus 1, which is 1, what will be the, what should be the principal? So the amount would be, the principal would be there, plus along with that principal I'll also get a rate of interest which is charged annually. So what I get is R into P0, which is P0 into 1 plus R, right? So basically if I stand here, right, So if I wait literally for 1 year, I should get principal, or I should get the amount P1. So how is this flow actually happening? So the first figure that I get is the principal. So that's the first flow that I have, and this is the at the point T0. Now in the second part, what I get is P1. So if I wait for 1 year, right, I will get principal one. Principal into 1 plus R. So what would be that equivalent amount, right, to me, that I think that it would be if it was converted into today's value, right? So P1 P1 into 1 plus R, right? So that's P0 is, so the equivalent of the P0 today's price is P1 by 1 plus R, right? So the P0 is that value discounted to this date. Now similarly, if I wait for 1 more year, I will get P2. So similarly, P2 is nothing but P0 into 1 plus R. So this will be by 1 plus R square. So you see that the score, or the cash flow gradually increases at a certain rate. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to convert that future price to today's value, or the future value in terms of today's value, from where I'm kind of getting a stream of payments, right? So this is called the discounted cash flow. And if you sum it up, the summation will be your net present value. So this is your discounted cash flow, right? So over here, what we have is the discounted cash flow. So, so what we can do, so the way this happens is based on the contractual cash flows, right? You know how the discounted cash flow is created, or how the discounted cash flow would look like. Now you see that there is a certain cash flow which is coming into you on a monthly basis or whatever. So someone is keeping or giving, whatever. So basis that you can actually frame out an idea, or you can actually create an idea about how the cash flows possibly could evolve in the future, right? And the difference between the two value will be your impairment. And precisely this approach is used by either the generalized method or by the simplified method for computing your impairment. And when you're computing the impairment, right, so there is something, so we'll come across two very important concepts. One is your discount rate. So the rate at which you are discounting the cash flows. Now the question that comes out is, why do we discount it? We are discounting it because we want to account for the time inconsistencies. Right? When I'm discounting the asset, so I'm discounting it at a given rate to ensure that the values are comparable across the different periods of time. So given that consistency, the values are consistent. Now, having said that, now next we need to understand that what is the type of the data, right? How is it that simplified approach data would look like, right? How is it that receivables data would look like? So this is where we next come to talk about the different kinds of the data that we have, right? So how does a receivables data look like? How would a generalized approach data look like, and so on, right? So this is what our this is what our next steps are. Now, once we have a look into the data, the next thing that we will talk about is how is it that these models are created. Now, to understand this model development approach, what we'll do is we'll start our analysis with the simplified approach. And our objective over here would be to develop the model, right, to get the lifetime PD, make it a point in time PD and make it forward looking using the macroeconomic variables. So how we do that? That is simply what our so that is simply what the simplified approach data would look like. Or that's what would be our simplified modeling data approach. Now, when I talk about simplified modeling, right, this is very different from the modeling that we generally talk about in CRM. So over there we talk about more structured models, right? Where you have data, you have variable, you are preparing the data, you are doing a data quality check, and doing a lot of different things. But over here, we are not doing such kind of a thing. We are doing it in a very simplistic manner, right? So let's use a very basic data set first and let's try and understand how this would work. And from there, we would gradually go to talk about the other data sets and all. So we'll talk about more structured or more realistic simplified approach models, right? So, okay. Fine. So if you have a look into this data, right, you will see that this data set contains of a list of outstanding balances. So this is a trade receivables data, right? And this is how the bad rates are. So this is the monthly loss percentage rate, right? And this is the expected loss percentage that we have computed to IFRS. Now, before we go into this part, right? So let's try to understand the background of this data set. What is this data all about, right? What are the things that we have over here, and how does the trade receivables approach or a simplified approach work for a trade receivables data? So, okay. So the first thing is, so I have a data which ranges from 31/1/2010 to 31/1/2014, right? So this is a data set which ranges from January to 14, and it is reported. The data is reported at the end of every month, right? So whatever the performance has been throughout Jan, that is reported on 31st of Jan. Whatever purposes has been through your Feb, that has been reported at the end of Feb, and so on, right? Now, similarly, so we have this entire flow that we have. Now comes the next part. The second balance or the second variable is the outstanding variable or the outstanding balance. Now, when I talk about this outstanding balance, so what does this mean? It means that as of this March, right? So there were multiple parties to which so they had sold the goods, but the balances from them were outstanding, and this is the total outstanding balance, right? So, so the outstanding balance over here is, if I look in the millions, it is in billions, right? So it is like 1 billion, 1.69 billions. Right. Now, this outstanding balance, it shows that this particular firm, which is operating a huge firm, right? So this is the balance which is outstanding with the borrowers whoever they have given. So their outstanding balance is some billion. So I can assume that whatever firm this is and who has their trade receivables is a $1 trillion firm, or it's a very huge $1 billion firm where outstanding of $1 billion is okay for them. Right, so it's a huge bank, or it's a kind of a huge financing portfolio, whatever. But it's a huge portfolio. So if you have a look into this, right? So if I look into this, if you have a look into this, you will see that the average is $1.5 billion of outstanding. Now, from there, what I can see is that monthly loss is roughly this. Right? So as on Jan, this is the monthly loss. And from there, what they have done is they have added up the next 12 months loss, and they have reported it here, right? The next 12-month loss. Now, when you talk about the next 12-month loss, right? So that means what, you are standing as on Jan 31st, 2010, and you are creating a next 12 months loss. So this is with this variable is there to make your what should I say? So this is there to make your loss measure a forward-looking measure, right? So out of the total outstanding balance in Jan, this is the amount. So in the next 12 months, this is the amount which is going to loss as on 31st Jan 2010. So with this, you are making your dependent variable a forward-looking dependent variable, right? Now, can you tell me this loss percentage that I have over here, what actually is this? This variable which I have named as a monthly loss percentage, right? What variable is this actually? Any thoughts? Yes. Think about this. So this is the monthly loss, right? Column D shows the monthly loss, column C shows the outstanding balance. And I'm doing the loss by the balance. What is that? This is your observed LGD, the loss given default. So over here you have your observed loss series as well. And you have your outstanding balance, right? The question that next comes down over here is that how do we work with it, right? Now what do I predict? Now over here, a typical situation. So one thing I can clearly see that this is a simple receivables outstanding, right? So there is no interest component or there is no financing component to it, and hence I'd say that fine. This is a simplified approach. Now what I want to know is that how is the risk distributed? So this is the loss, right, which is happening. What I want to know is that out of the this total value of the loss, how is this loss distributed across the different buckets of delinquency? Because let's say, as on a given month, I have a certain balance which is lying in the first cycle of delinquency. That is relatively less risky than the asset which is the other, so which is like what should I say? So which is so CD1 is relatively less risky than CD2. CD2 is relatively less risky than CD3. So what we can expect is that if a balance is sitting at CD1 as of January, right, a lower proportion of that should flow into loss from there, right, compared to the balance which is sitting in CD2. So this way, so basically to identify the relative riskiness of the balances across the buckets, we need to know how is it different, kind of spread across the different buckets. So this is where, this bucket-wise split has actually come in, right? Now these are not actual figures. So what we have done is I have taken out some ratios, right? This is how a distribution generally is seen, and basis that I've kind of populated it, right? So it says that more or less. So if I look into this, you know, this percentage value. So what I have done is I have made an assumption over here. Because I don't have the outstanding balance, right, over here, what I have said is that Fine. We have the total balance. Now, with the discussion with the business, what we can also do is we can very easily uh, create a percentage distribution across the balances. Now, generally, what is seen now, if a business is going fine, and given the amount of loss that is there, you would always expect majority of the balance to lie in CD0. So if you are doing your business properly, if you are doing a healthy business, if your portfolio is not a toxic portfolio, then majority of your balances should lie in CD0. Right? So over here, what I have is I have the outstanding balance, and as you can see, we have made an assumption that, so this is an assumption, and the assumption in the sense that this is a very ordinal assumption. Now, what I'm trying to tell them is that okay, 80% of the balances, so CD0 always contains roughly around 80% of the balance, so 75 to 80%, right, or 85% of the balances. The remaining balance, the second largest balance should be concentrated in CD1, followed by CD2, and there. Now, given this percentage distribution, what I've done is I've tried identifying, okay, how much is the balance line in CD0, CD2, CD3, CD4 like this, right? Now, so over here, we have multiple total outstanding balance with that percentage balance in CD0, with CD1, CD2, and I have computed the respective balances. So now my data set is this one. The month, the distribution of the balances across the current bucket, the distribution of the balances across between CD1, CD2, CD4 is 90 plus DVD, right? So as per the IFRS9 standards, if your balances flow into or it hits the 90 days past due, then you know that that particular model or that particular uh, variable or that particular data the balance is an impaired balance, or it's a bad balance, right? So 90 days past due is the typical bad definition, right? So up to this point, is it clear, Anshu? Anshu, are you okay up to this point? Hello.